I think we are actually live now.
Oh,
I think I've done it. I've figured it out, Ben. It seems to be working. So let me just check on YouTube app. Yes, we
we're
are.
live. Oh, we're live. How are you? Come on.
We got there in the end. We got there in the end after a bit of a mammoth task, but we are back, everybody. Okay, so let's talk through the team news. Okay, that's thrown me off a little bit. So, welcome back, everybody. Obviously, Ben and I have not been here for a little while, but in terms of it, we're just going to be going through what we usually do, the team news, the latest information. And as always, we've got Mr. Dinnery here to answer your questions. But yeah, as always, Ben, it's been a while, but how have you been?
It's a pleasure to be back in the hot seat, Jay Mac. All good, my friend. As always, very busy, especially in the build-up to game week 1 of the new Premier League season. Really enjoyed it. It's been a bit of a slog, but looking forward to the first game tonight. And obviously, very much looking forward to kicking things off once again with your good self.
Yes. So at the moment, I don't know why we've got a few errors here, but we're just going to trope on through. But we're going to start off with the Arsenal team lineup, and now obviously we're being live at the moment, so we're going to go through till about 7, and we'll know the Liverpool team news then, so we can kind of describe everything. I'm going to work hard here whilst you go through the Arsenal team news here, Ben. Well, I think one of the big talking points that a lot of people will be interested in is the fact that Victor Gyökeres is not kind of in this predicted lineup, whereas Kai Havertz is. So what is the reasoning for that?
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a coin toss. I think Victor Gyökeres, first and foremost, will almost certainly be that medium to long-term option. That's why Mikel Arteta has brought him in. However, as we know with players coming in to squads, particularly from outside of the Premier League, players who haven't played before, it does take a period of adaptation. There's new methodologies and philosophies to learn under Mikel Arteta. We know that Kai Havertz, having had that surgery on his hamstring earlier on this year, did return at the back end of 24-25. And he's had a good, barring a couple of sessions missed as a precaution, he's had a good pre-season under his belt. And I think that's probably where Mikel Arteta go with the tried and tested Kai Havertz, just because of that extra little bit of work with the squad. But like I say, it really is a coin toss. It could go either way with that one, but I'm happy to stick with Havertz on that call.
And just kind of taking it off a little bit, we obviously go through these normally alphabetically, but Alan Russell has sent in a question and he said, can you tell me if both Brighton and Spurs win their games? So what do you think on that one, Ben? I think Brighton looked really good towards the end of last season. Obviously, Spurs are playing a newly promoted Burnley side, but kind of in the injury aspect as well. Is there anything that should hold either of those teams back, or do you think people should be confident with those picks there?
Yeah, I do quite like Brighton. One of the big talking points coming up to this start of the season was, will or won't he, Carlos Baleba be down on the south coast in Willie State at the AMX Stadium? That probably looks like it's going to happen. There was a lot of interest from Manchester United, and people sort of read the rumour mill went into overdrive with regards to a minor knee injury that's kept Baleba out of a couple of pre-season friendlies there. However, he is fit and available, and I do expect Fabian Hertha to put him straight back into that starting lineup. So there is a few places up for grabs in that Brighton. And what we always say at the start of every season, it is a little bit of a lottery. We can look at those last pre-season friendlies as a good guide and a yardstick to see who would be starting. But undoubtedly, it's going to take a few weeks for teams to settle in. With regards to Tottenham, we did hear from Thomas Frank, of course. They were very unfortunate, maybe not in your eyes as an Arsenal supporter, Jason, but very unfortunate to lose out to PSG in the Super Cup, particularly in the 90 minutes. So that performance overall was quite pleasing. Now, the concerns would be, given the intensity and the humidity and the heat, in that final, that players, will be heavily fatigued. But Thomas Frank has said that those players have recovered really well. And it's not necessarily the concern of playing a second game in a week. It's maybe the third one. So he sort of nods towards, maybe they're going to be minimal or possibly even no changes in that Tottenham lineup, with the exception, the question mark's going to be, does he bring Issa Basuma back into the squad, who was absent due to disciplinary reasons midweek?
So great answers there for questions, and just keep them rolling in. Ben is the one who is best suited for all these sorts of questions. But just kind of going back to the Arsenal team news before we get on to the others. Again, we're going alphabetically here, but going back to the Premier Injuries website, and which is where I suggest everybody goes to get their injury news. Leandro Trossard, he has a late fitness test. You flagged him as 75%. What's the kind of information there?
Yeah, he has been working with the squad. He has been doing involvement in some training. So really, we'd be pretty confident that Trossard would be included in the 19, barring any kind of reaction. So really, like I say, it was nothing serious. Again, around preseason, you don't want to be taking any chances or risks with players. And I suppose that feeds nicely into maybe the absence of Jurriën Timber. People may be looking at that. Timber has had a heavily disrupted preseason program. He only returned to the latter stages of that. So again, he's just building up that level of sharpness and fitness. And given his history in recent seasons, then again, it's better to err on the side of caution and maybe delay his involvement, certainly from the start, for at least another week or so.
So that's kind of not on the website as well. So what kind of time frame? You're saying 2 or 3 weeks is
Yeah. So this is not injury related as such. Like I say, it's more just about Jurriën Timber building up that match fitness, building up that foundational fitness, which will hopefully see him through. So it's more about, what maybe Mikel Arteta's, one, seen on the training pitches, and two, given his history, how he feels he's going to utilize them best, because you don't want players just to come in and maybe play 1 or 2 games and then drop out because they've picked up a little knock or a niggle. You need longevity in this game, particularly, when you want your best players available for the big matches, and you've got European competition to consider as well. So it could be, Jurriën Timber is sort of steadily building himself up, to optimal performances towards maybe the back end of August.
So let's switch over our attention on to the next one, and that's Bournemouth, and they're obviously playing tonight. So I think obviously because they're playing tonight, and we'll get onto that when it is on the stream and everything, the team news comes through. First of all, is there any big news that people need to be aware of with Bournemouth? But we can kind of skip over that, I guess, until things go live.
Yeah, I mean, the quick one, Andoni Areola spoke about he wasn't sure whether Dango Ouattara would be involved, because obviously he's been heavily linked with the move away. Now it looks like that bid has been accepted, and it looks as if he's on his way to Brentford. I think in a fee reported to be around about 42.5 million. So that's why he is not going to be in the matchday squad. The other big question is whether the new centre-back Diakite comes into that starting lineup. He's ready in terms of his physical. He's injury free, but again, it's about, do you take a risk, especially against a team like Liverpool, of throwing, a new signing in when he's had minimal time on the training pitches with his new teammates?
Now, the attention we're going to throw onto is actually Brentford. This is a team that over the summer, there's been a lot of disruption. There's a lot of question marks. And I think one of the things that people will be really interested in is maybe your opinion on how quickly Thiago can make an impact on this team, because obviously they've lost Mbermo. There's obviously the talk of Visa going, maybe joining your boys Newcastle. But, with this, it's a team that is going to be in transition this season. They're going to struggle because the manager's not there, or are they? Every time we kind of see this with Brentford, they seem to bounce back. They lost Tony. Well, they got Mbermo. Before that, they had Watkins. They found Tony. Before that, they've had so many stars come in and out of this side, and they seemingly are able to replace them. But not only that, seem to do better year on year. So maybe Thomas Frank will be replaced by a better manager because they've gone internally as well. So I guess there's obviously the big news that Visa won't be playing in this game, but kind of what are your opinions around the club and obviously the starting 11 and just the things that have gone on over there in the summer?
Yeah, look, it's like you say, you mentioned it's a period of transition. It's going to be very tough for Brentford, certainly during these opening game weeks. And you touched upon it in a conversation that we had. If you look outside of those top three promoted teams, then Brentford are next in line as the bookies' favourite to be relegated. Now, that says a lot about the expectations of the statisticians and the people, the bookmakers in and around that. And it really, it's hard to disagree. We have seen one or two arrivals. Jordan Henderson returns to the Premier League, and he's had a little bit of time in Saudi, went across to the Dutch league. He's a couple of years older, a little bit wiser, but he's not going to have that in his legs as he did when he was maybe at Liverpool. So that's going to be a big sign. And of course, when you take out the likes of and Embuemo and Johan Wissa, who again is heavily linked with the move to Newcastle, then the Premier League is all about goals. And when you're losing that firepower, it's not easy to replace.
But do you think maybe a different story to focus on is actually the fact that they've kept the back line mostly together, and some people have actually made it in there? I think they've made an improvement with Kelleher as a goalkeeper, and quite often the story of these teams fighting relegation is actually their back line. So do you think that that's almost a bit of a boost, and maybe people are believing in the doom and gloom too much?
Well, I mean, and you can also point to the return of Rico Henry. He's had a very injury ravaged sort of 18 months off the back of an ACL injury, had minimal minutes last season. Also, you can clump together Aaron Hickey with that as well. So, on their day, when they're fully fit and back to optimal levels, undoubtedly there'll be two big players for Brentford. But I still think, the way the Premier League's going, when you look at some of the, those big sides and who they're bringing in and their attacking prowess, I do fear for Brentford. I really do. Yes, I can see the likes of what you're saying about that back line, but it's certainly not impenetrable. And, I just think that they will struggle.
So we've already kind of skipped over Bournemouth, but I'm going to circle it back here because we do have a question here from Vasco Bessa, and he's asked about Clover, but also Branthwaite. So what are the kind of timelines on both of their injuries?
Yeah, so Clive had picked up a minor sort of muscle problem, calf related. Ariola initially thought that, well, Webby's looking at something around 7 to 10 days. However, you can never be 100% certain with that. And the player just didn't respond as hoped. So that's why he's out of this game. He's still not training with the squad. And typically what will happen is he'll transition through these various phases of rehab, and things can be going quite well, but we'll not know, will not be able to give a good indication of where Clive's at until he rejoins the group and he's training fully with the squad. So, we would hope for maybe week 2 or possibly even week 3. But again, if there are any concerns there, it could be that, they won't take any risks at all. It really depends on how Bournemouth, start. And if they can get one or two decent results under the belt, then it takes the pressure off Ariola. And like I say, Clive can maybe have that little bit of additional time to ensure that that calf problem has fully healed. Secondly, I think you mentioned Jared Branthwaite. Again, now he's spent most of the summer sidelined with a hamstring that he picked up the back end of last season. Now the concern here is that I think he had his first outing last weekend against Roma, if I'm correct. He played in and around sort of 78, 79 minutes. Went into the training ground this week and he suffered a setback with the same hamstring injury. Now, the concern is we don't know the full extent of that, but typically if you're having that re-injury or a recurrence of the same hamstring in the same area, then, you take a step back with regards to that recovery and rehab. So for my thinking, and although David Moyes was very coy on and reluctant to give any kind of time frame, I'd be very surprised if we seen Branthwaite this side of the international break.
Wow, that's a huge blow for them then. So continuing, we've already covered Brentford here, and as always, people do get joined in with the comments, and also for the kind of information and also data, do head over to the Numbers Game website. But we're going to focus now on Brighton. And we've covered that a little bit already, but let's talk through the 11 here. What is the kind of big news? The kind of projection here is that Belieber is going to start. But any others that people need to be aware of who are coming in and out of the side, any late fitness tests that are going to possibly upset the Seagulls for game week 1?
Yeah, one that you may have missed is the absence of Adam Webster. He was looking great during the preseason. He was looking sharp. He was looking fit. Unfortunately, he suffered a major setback, an ACL rupture. He's had surgery, and that's going to keep him out for most, if not all, of the season. So that's a huge blow for Fabian Hürzeler. And their preseason overall has went pretty well. They've had one or two sort of knocks and niggles along the way, but again, nothing too serious. We've seen that my sort of outside shout for a player to really come back and hit the ground running would be Karu Mitoma. He went off the boil a bit last season, but that was a little bit of an injustice because he was managing an ongoing sort of foot stroke heel problem, and he just wasn't looking his normal fluid, attacking, explosive self. But like I say, with a good preseason under his belt, he could be a great player to watch.
Yeah, that's a really good talking point, actually. So you think that injury maybe put a ceiling on his output, and actually this season he's coming into it full preseason, no kind of knockbacks. Do you think he could be the Matoma that we saw a couple of seasons ago?
Well, that would be the hope, and that's the expectation. I mean, again, he's a player that had been potentially linked with a move away from the AMX Stadium over the summer, but here he is, and he's fighting fit. And like I say, what people outside of football sometimes don't realize is, players are going out there and they're maybe only 70 or 80% fit, and they've got to do a job for their club. And he wasn't really taken up permanent like we've seen him in the past. But like I say, if he can come back to anywhere near his post-injury, or certainly was it the 23-24 season when he looked, like he looked like a world beater, then, Brighton, it's almost like, the old adage, he'd be like a new signing.
So moving our attention really quickly. So we've covered Brighton there. And as always, I like to remind people that we try and do this as much as alphabetically as possible. But obviously the deadline is coming in terms of fantasy football and things like that as well. We've got Pan Jan. He's saying, is Perry a safe starter? So that's the Leeds goalkeeper. I'm not too au fait with the newly promoted sides. Can you give a more definitive answer there, Ben?
Again, it's always difficult with promoted side, but obviously Lucas Perry has come in because the expectation is Daniel Faulkner wants him certainly to be in and around that starting berth, whether it is to compete. He did have a lack of fitness. There was a hamstring issue again that's hampered his preseason, but he was given minutes last time out. So I think, again, medium to long term, he'd be locked in for me. And look, I think given what we've seen in the past with the likes of Mesley and things like that, I think Perry, should be locked in for game week 1.
So Burnley back in the Premier League. They're going to play a very defensive game here, travelling to Tottenham. But what is the injury news there? And I guess one of the things that people are going to be looking at is one of your old boys, Dubravka. Is he going to be in between the sticks for them this weekend?
Yeah, Scott Parker, very guarded with his information during Thursday's press conference. He outlined the fact that maybe Jordan Bayern had a bit of a setback, hasn't played actually since the last time Burnley were in the Premier League. There's also Amdoni, who had an ACL tear. But other than that, he more or less said that everybody's fine. That's not really the case 100%. Yeah, they might be injury free, but whether those guys are fully up to speed and ready, certainly to be involved, or they're not going to be ready to start. I mean, we're talking about new signings and Armando Broja. Again, very limited preseason. I think he's had minutes in a behind closed doors game, but very little time with his new teammates. Leslie Ugochukwu, again, another player who's come in. I think he's been involved a little bit more with the team, and he has a chance of being in and around it. Martin Dubravka, as you mentioned, that was a minor shoulder problem. It stopped him going on tour with Newcastle, and that coincided, with a move away from the club. and there's been very little to suggest that that shoulder issue is going to cause him certainly any long-term problems. So personally, I'm expecting Dubravka to start this weekend for the Clarets. I'll be interesting to see, who exactly, Scott Parker turns out, because they've got a lot of players coming in and out of. The expectation is there will be a few players leaving, and of course they've had a fairly sort of extensive injury list, or certainly a watch list in and around those players. So, like I say, it might take a week or two for these ones to sort of settle down and get a really good handle on where Burnley are at with their players.
So Crystal Palace are up next, and then I think it will be time for the breaking team news, I should say. We're obviously doing the breaking injury news at the moment. So Chelsea up next, and there's a lot of eyes on this team because there's so many personnel coming in. With that kind of number of individuals making their way into the side, they've also had a huge injury blow with Levi Colwill. What is your kind of belief around the team? Who's going to be starting? Who's going to be in there? And does this number of changes actually make them maybe a little bit unsettled once again at the start of the season? Those players kind of learning, how to play with one another.
Yeah, we've got a few sort of influencing factors in and around that Chelsea team. Let's not forget that they've had a heavily disrupted pre-season programme coming off the back of that Club World Cup win. So yes, players will be full of confidence, but again, ideally, if you were to ask Enzo Maresca about, where his players are at, he would have preferred a little bit more time on the training pitches and, one or two sort of additional games to get the guys back into flow. It can work one or two ways. Either they're going to come in, hit the ground running and play really well, or secondly, it's going to be a little bit slow. And further down the line, potentially, you may see players who are, maybe picking up muscle-related soft tissue problems, just given the fact that they've had very little rest and recovery over the summer. With Levi Colwill, you could maybe point at that fatigue-related, certainly as an influencing factor. That was done in one of the first training sessions back. So again, that's ACL reconstruction, surgery, either all or most of the season. Wesley Fofana is a player who could potentially come into that back line, but again, he's coming off the back of surgery on his hamstring, so certainly he wouldn't be in that starting 11. And in fact, Enzo Maresca would like to go and dip into the transfer market again, as he believes Toyson is the only centre-back capable of maybe replicating the role of Levi Colwill.
Yes. So is there any breaking team news then, Ben? Can you break the 11s down for Liverpool and Bournemouth yet, or has that not come in yet?
Well, I mean, I'm not looking, but I certainly will look now just for you, Jason.
That's most kind of you. As that comes in, hopefully, we're going to move over to Crystal Palace, who are obviously playing Chelsea this weekend. And I've obviously got a gripe with them. How dare they not sell Eze to us yet? As an Arsenal fan, everybody. But yeah, Ben, breaking news or not quite yet?
I've got nothing through on Liverpool as it currently stands. So there must be there's a slight delay, but we'll go on to the Crystal Palace news, and like I say, as soon as something comes through official from Liverpool, we can touch upon that. With regards to Palace, done very well in the Community Shield against Liverpool. I think they surprised a few people in taking that game through to a draw and obviously winning that on a penalty shootout. There was one slight concern when Mark Guy appeared to be limping off at the end, but that was fatigue-related cramp. Therefore, I wouldn't expect many, if any, changes from Oliver Glasner this weekend. Of course, you touched upon it. Eberechi Eze, heavily linked with a move to your boys. He's still training with the squad. There's any suggestion he's going to do an Isaac and down tools and force that move through. So he's still working hard. He's doing the right thing, the true professional that he is. So I will fully expect Eze to start along with Guy and for the Eagles to be unchanged.
I've just realised as well that I've gone a little bit early there with the Liverpool team news because it's 6:30. It's not 7 yet. So obviously it's an hour before the game when the team news comes out. I'm terribly sorry to have misguided you there, Ben. But go on, what were you going to say?
I was actually under the impression that the team news went live an hour and a half before.
Oh, okay. Maybe
Or might
maybe it
be
will
an
be.
hour and 15. It might be between the two of you. It shows, we're not used to it. You see, we're out
Yeah,
the
we're
swing
out
of
the
things
loop at the
here.
moment. We're going to get back into it. This is week one.
Mhm.
It's 38 game weeks. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Um, just on that talking point with Eze versus maybe the Isak situation, what are your feelings about players that are being, talked about in the rumor mills, and if people are kind of expecting an output from them? Would you be backing those players, or would you be kind of cautious around them because you'd be thinking, well, actually they might be dropped or they might be rested, and somebody else might play in that position? Or is somebody like Eze so talismanic it doesn't matter, and it's only in instances like Isak where they down tools, where they stop playing, that actually the issue begins?
I think it really comes down to the individual and how they're performing on a day-to-day basis in training, how they're engaging with their teammates. You know, to use as Oliver Glasner will be seeing that firsthand every single day, and it's quite evident that Eze, regardless of the surrounding noise about a potential move away, he's happy to just put his nose down and get on with it. And what will be, and that's great. And like I say, as a Palace fan, a supporter, as Oliver Glasner would be over the moon to be able to include as in his starting 11. The Isak situation again, it's very different. It's something I didn't really see coming as a Newcastle supporter, particularly after we qualified for the Champions League. And, it seemed as if the club was in ascendancy following that Carabao Cup win. And I think me overall feeling with anybody wanting to move, it's a short career. You want to maximize, your earnings. You want to take that opportunity when it's handy with both hands. Because on the flip side, if a club doesn't want you, if the club wanted to cash in on Isak for PSR, the player wouldn't have any say in that. But I think there's a way to go around things, and whether this has been driven by Isak, his agent, under his instruction or what, I just think it has tarnished his reputation up on Tyneside. The door is still open, but it's difficult at the minute, and conversations need to happen. But of course, if he was to get back into that squad and he was to score, we know how fickle fans are, and it wouldn't take long to forget all about that if Isak, fires us into the Champions League final. Go next May.
I mean, that's very positive thinking there for the season. But it's a team that I think are actually going to do quite well this season. Positive, bubbling under the surface. They seem to have got things together. Is Everton. Now, obviously on screen here, the expected Everton lineup has Jarrad Branthwaite. That's not been updated yet. So who's going to come in there to replace Jarrad Branthwaite? And can you talk us through any other news in and around the team?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk with regards to the fullback, Vitaly Mykolenko. He limped off early doors last time out with a suspected muscle problem. Now, obviously, Everton don't play until Monday night, so there's quite a few sessions between now and then for managers to assess their players. David Moyes wouldn't go as far as to rule the players out, and said the likes of Patterson, Mykolenko, and the young player Harrison Armstrong all have a chance. But again, it depends on how they come through that. So that's one to watch. With regards to who potentially comes into that back line, there's a couple of options for David Moyes. The obvious one, we have James Tarkowski sitting in there, and you could put Michael Keane alongside him. But we've also seen James Garner deputise in that position at times during pre-season as well. So there's a couple of options in there. I also like, and I think it's a great signing for them, the likes of Jack Grealish. I'm expecting a player who really, wants to come out and really prove a point, both to, the likes of Pep, Manchester City, the doubters, and himself, to show that he can really go out. He loves being the main man. He loves being the centre of attention. He'll get the love from the supporters at Everton, and I'm expecting a big season from Jack.
So with that, do you think that it's a little bit too soon for him to start in game week one? Is he going to be eased into the side?
In terms of Jack Grealish, um, do you leave Jack Grealish on the bench, particularly David Moyes? He's already, it hasn't been a great preseason. David Moyes has talked about the lack of recruitment and their failure to maybe get some of those players over the line, very much like Eddie Howe at Newcastle. Look, Jack Grealish comes in and he starts, and if he's struggling and he's blown a little bit, then he comes off. He does his 55, his 60 minutes, and then he comes off. I would, like I say, for me, he starts, he gives the place a huge lift, and I think it's just what both him and Everton need.
So Dewsbury Hall definitely starts. You're thinking Jack Grealish starts as well. Does that mean Alcaraz is going to be benched? Is he the one who's going to miss out in the team?
You could possibly play Alcaraz as well as those. There's a few different ways that David Moyes could set up his team. We would assume that Ndai will probably go in there as well, with maybe Beto leading the Toffees front line. Of course, they've just got rid of Dominic Calvert-Lewin is signed for Leeds, so he's no longer at the club. So no, there's still room in that setup for Alcaraz. Like I say, it'll be a tough call, but yeah, I do expect Jack Grealish to start. But maybe that I do have a soft spot for him, because I just think he's a good guy, and he's just fallen by the wayside a little bit, and I think this is an opportunity for him to really prove himself to everyone again.
Oh, I love him as well. I think he's a very exciting footballer, and maybe the Pep style didn't work for him as well, because he's creative. He's quite an individualist, whereas obviously Pep teams are a sum of their parts. They're all about the team working in unison. I wanted to ask as well. You said Beto there, and he had some standout performances last season, but also Everton have bought a new striker, Tierno Barry. He's obviously joined from Spain. Again, is it this kind of situation where it's the league tax? Will he be eased into the team as well? Coming from a lesser physical league, and obviously David Moyes likes a certain type of striker, somebody that can hold up the ball. Is that going to be something that's going to be worked on for the next few weeks to get that fitness, that awareness, and adapt to the Premier League?
Yeah, my own feeling would be, like I say, you've got players who are tried and tested there. There's no need to try and, reinvent the wheel. These players have been out and they've done it. So, why not, try to mitigate that risk, try to get some points on the board, and then hopefully introduce these players from the bench. And, you're gradually sort of getting them acclimated to the rigors of Premier League football.
So just going back, Sam has asked, will Brentford striker be starting, do you reckon? So Thiago was that one. Now, we did cover that, but just quickly, Ben, you think that Thiago will start or not start?
Yeah. I think it is Thiago that's going to get the nod. I don't think there are too many options at the disposal for Keith Andrews. So he will get the one, and hopefully he can stay fit. And like I say, but he's going to. There's a lot of weight on those shoulders, some big boots to fill. And like I say, I think it's going to be a difficult season for the Bees.
And with the Thiago, once again, just reminding people, he had terrible injury. Now, with that type of injury, is he going to be managed conservatively in these first few games this season? So again, maybe manage expectations and output, or is this not the type of injury that would affect that? Well, what do you think, Ben?
Yeah, it is difficult, because you're in that sort of that vicious circle where maybe you're looking towards those better players within the squad. Certainly, where maybe positional wise, you maybe lack a little bit of strength and depth with that. But listen, he's had a pretty decent pre-season under his belt, and although there are no guarantees, you hope that you can do the most. What you can to prepare the players for that. And they've come through all of those games, and I know, pre-season, non-competitive, behind closed doors, and so on and so forth. It's not quite the same as the Premier League. If they come through those, then, you've done the most you can at this point, and you just hope that, like I say, you get through those early games, and hopefully that makes them more robust for future fixtures.
Well, thanks for the question there, Sam, and hopefully we answer that for you. And as always, just make sure to hit that subscribe button here on the Numbers Game. We're going to be coming every week, every Friday with Ben here in terms of the injury news. And then also on Thursdays, we have our top picks for the weekend. But let's turn our attention to Fulham. And this is a side that's actually surprised me this summer with the lack of kind of, I don't know, if is it harsh to say, a bit of lack of ambition. They've not really signed anybody. And they're a team that, they always bubble around mid-table, but it's that situation where if you don't sign anybody, you're actually moving backwards, aren't you, in the Premier League? So what is the team news for game week 1 for them? Because they've got some big players that are going to be out. And so with the lack of signings and these players out, it's not a great start to the season for them, is it?
Yeah, well, one of the big players for Fulham is Anthony Robinson, Jedi, as he's more affectionately known as. He had knee surgery towards the back end of May. It was hoped that he would be sort of in and around for game week 1. He has been seen on the training pitches, but he's not quite there yet. So again, it may be a week or two before we're sort of seeing Anthony Robinson forcing his way back into that first team squad. So that's a heavy blow for them. Also, Ryan Sessegnon, again, we've seen his career's been blighted throughout, with muscle problems, hamstring tears, and so on and so forth. He picked up, he had a little bit of a niggle last time out. It was more precautionary. I think Marco Silva said the player made the decision to come off, which was turned out to be a bit of a wise one. He has trained. So again, as long as there's no reaction, then we could see Ryan Sessegnon in and around that starting 11.
And so elsewhere in the team, Wilson's back and he's getting fitness into his legs. But what's the news about Josh King, one of their academy prospects, but also Emil Smith-Rowe? Well, what are the kind of news about those two there? Because they seem to be vying for the same position as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of competition in there. We're certainly not aware of any injury problems, and I haven't heard quite a lot of talk about Emil Smith-Rowe. Again, he's a player that arrived down the Craven Cottage with a full of fanfare. We expected it was difficult at Arsenal, particularly under Arteta. He had those injury problems. The general feeling was, he needed to move away. He needed minutes under his belt to really sort of flourish and fulfill that potential that we've all spoken about for a long time. Technical ability isn't in doubt, but he had a bit of a stop-start season last year. I think that levels of consistency of getting the minutes in his legs. In the past, Marco Silva's spoken about it. Like, he needs to be able to produce week in and week out, and that's just something which he hasn't been able to do so far. Personally, I'm not sure if Emil Smith-Rowe does start this game week, but again, I think Marco Silva will be looking to maybe tie in with his starting 11 and maybe a few changes over the first maybe couple of game weeks as players settle. But Josh King, you mentioned him. He's a big prospect, and he could have a big part to play for Fulham this season. Again, dependent on who they're able to sort of go out there and bring in before the transfer deadline.
So Leeds are up next in terms of the team talks, and Ben's just I think you're going to check for the Liverpool news as well. But the Leeds United fans are going to be buzzing for this, back in the Premier League once again. But it's a changed team from what we all know from when they were last here. But do they have any kind of injury worries that are going to put a dent in the start of their 25-26 season? Or is this actually a Leeds team that is going to be fighting and raring? Because just kind of bring it back to the Bielsa era. That was an era where there was a lot of injuries because of the style of play. So, yeah, is injuries going to be part of the story at the start of the season, or are they all clear at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, fingers crossed. Hopefully not. You need, the best ability is availability. How many times do we say that? And particularly when you're coming up from, that second tier of English football, we know the gulf between the two is massive. So you need your good and your best players, to stay fit and available and to be able to perform optimally. One of those players, arguably, is key within that backline is Jayden Bogle. Now, he's been struggling with a hip flexor issue. That's kept him out for the last sort of 2.5 weeks. Now, again, Leeds play on Monday night, and Bogle was due to train with the squad this afternoon. It depends on his reaction in terms of what that's going to happen, and how he progresses through those sort of next 2 to 3 sessions. All being well, then you could see Daniel Faulkner will be more than happy to throw him back into that starting 11 potentially. Again, elsewhere, Patrick Bamford, the most frustrating striker in fantasy football, was a player that we discussed on numerous occasions. You'll see that he's effectively been told by Daniel Faulkner that he hasn't got a future at the club. He certainly won't be called upon this season. We know he was very wasteful in terms of his XG conversion. So poor old Patrick Bamford won't be a part of Leeds' plans this season. I don't really know what to expect from them. A lot of people are saying that of the 3 promoted teams, that Leeds are probably hopefully they will fare the best. But it remains to be seen, because, like I say, that step up in class is huge, and it may take one of those players 1 or 2 times to settle in.
So Liverpool.
The Liverpool news is in.
Let's have the breaking news then, Ben.
Yeah, it's pretty much as we expected. For me, ahead of the announcement, there was probably only one place really up for grabs, and that was with regards to Alexi McAllister. We know that he was struggling with that groin problem towards the back end of last season. So again, competitive minutes in pre-season has actually been fairly limited. He didn't start in that community game, so there's a possibility, would it be the likes of Curtis Jones who could possibly come in there alongside maybe Slobosai? But no, McAllister gets the nod. Elsewhere, it's pretty much as you were. With Alisson, you've got Van Dijk and Konate in the heart of that defence. That pretty much picks itself with Joe Gomez. He has returned to the matchday squad, so he has been named on the bench. But again, he probably only had 3 sessions with the team. That was an Achilles issue that forced his early departure from the club's pre-season tour, I think, of Asia. In the attack, you go Etatike and Gakpo and Salah. So I expect Liverpool to come out all guns blazing. It is going to be a tough night for that Bournemouth backline, and I would expect 3 points on the board.
And so on the flip side, is the Bournemouth team news in as well, Ben?
We will check, Jason. It's just coming up. And it should be. Is it? We haven't got the team news in yet from Bournemouth, on just looking on their official social media channels. But again, as soon as that drops, I will let you know.
So we've obviously covered Liverpool there because that is live now. Now, Manchester City, a lot of discussion now because obviously we've seen Rodri out, but then there's also been another blow this week. Ben, talk us through what that is doing for their preparation for the start of 25-26 season.
Yeah, I actually watched today's press conference, and hand on heart, I had absolutely no idea what Pep was saying. I couldn't understand a word of it. I picked up the odd name. He did talk about Edison. I even recorded and kept on going back over it, and I had to rely on other people to try and decipher what he was saying. But the long and the short of it, Edison has travelled. Again, there was talk about Donnarumma coming in from Paris Saint-Germain. And if so, Edison, who enters the last year of his contract, is reported to be on his way. But as it stands, he is travelling. We do expect him to start. If there was any issues with that, then James Trafford, who came in from Burnley and chose City over Newcastle, would be the player to sort of fill his boots. Josef Guardiola was a player who we were hoping would return, but he is definitely out of the game. So he's one of a couple of absentees, along with the likes of Mateo Kovacic and Savino. The 2 players who are returning, Rodri, obviously the Spaniard, was huge, and everybody put down last season's failure, partly due to the absence of the Spaniard in that holding role. Really helps the citizens tick in there. Come back off that ACL issue. The knee is fine, it's sound, but as always with long-term injuries, there's always a likelihood that you're going to pick up with a little knocks and niggles. And he did at the Club World Cup. That was an adductor issue. He's just returned to training. He's probably got a week or so under his belt. So again, in terms of optimal levels of fitness, that'll probably not come until after the international break, but he should be in and around the match day squad. Again, I wouldn't expect minutes from the beginning, probably reduced from the bench, certainly in the first couple of games.
And with the ACL injury as well, this is something that we've discussed with Dr. Matt Preventure, and people can check this out, obviously, on the Premier Injuries website. But it does take a while for a player to get back to their previous peak, if at all. Is this something that people should be aware of with Rodri? And is this something that maybe people should be worried about with Manchester City this season? Because it could take him a very long time to get back to his best, and they're so reliant on him.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a general acceptance these days that, look, ACL injuries were once career-ending or certainly career-threatening, and that's not the case anymore with the advancements in recovery protocols and surgical techniques and technologies to be able to support players. But there is still, it can come with a heavy price, and while players, you know can return to the highest level, they're maybe not at those pre-injury, and players can be hampered with that. So again, there's no guarantees. General feeling is that players will not, we talk about return to play, and that's good. You're in and around it. But ultimately, if we're talking about fantasy or betting, or we're looking at individuals, what we want is we want to see that return to performance. We want to see that player at his best and contributing, to a game, having imposing himself, making City tick, and so on and so forth. And that may take a little bit of a while, certainly, to do that on a consistent level, because players are still finding their feet. And again, there's no guarantees. Every indication is so far that what we've seen with Rodri is that he's going to be okay. But like I say, I think fans and supporters, just need to be, appreciate that, once you've spent sort of 8, 9, 10 months on the sidelines, you're not just going to come in and hit the ground running on a consistent level.
And the final question about Manchester City is Gundogan going to be starting, therefore, in this midfield? Because Rodri's absent. We know the way that Pep likes to play. He's got Cherky, he's got Doku, he's obviously got Phil Foden in there. They seem to be kind of vying for 3 positions there. 2 positions for 3 players. But yeah, what is the kind of feeling there? Or do you think Foden will play alongside Silva and Reinders in that midfield? Or is Pep just really hard to predict? Maybe he could whip something new out.
Yeah, very difficult to predict. And a player that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, and I know he's very highly regarded by Pep. It's just whether he believes he's got it in his legs at this point, is John Stones.
Yes.
John Stones is more than capable of playing that hybrid role, either just in front of the back 4. And we've even seen on occasions playing a little bit up, higher up the pitch. Very intelligent. He's got great footballing IQ. His runs, he can really sort of make things tick. And it wouldn't surprise me if, John Stones was a starter in that City team, in and around that sort of maybe CDM role, or a little bit higher. Maybe he's alongside the likes of Reinders and Bernardo Silva.
I mean, we've seen it previously as well. He's played that kind of defensive midfield role, and he is so well adapted to the Pep style that, like you say, it wouldn't surprise me there. Now, Manchester United, they're obviously a team that have made some huge signings this summer, and the kind of signings have also brought into question who's going to be playing in the side. So let's talk about all the big players there. We've got Cunha, we've got Mbeumo. Is Sesko going to play? Where's Fernandez going to play? I think this is one of those teams that actually has maybe the most question marks over it. So yeah, what is your kind of belief there? Maybe from back to front. So Onana's going to start. Who's going to be in the back line, Ben?
But yeah, I mean, Onana's again coming off the back of a hamstring injury, but yeah, we would certainly expect him to get the nod. And then you'd probably look to the likes of Matthijs de Ligt centrally, and he could maybe be flanked by the likes of Lenny Yoro, and on the left-hand side you might get Luke Shaw. And again, I think this is a huge season for Luke Shaw, both for him and for Manchester United. He needs to get that consistency in game time, and if he harbours any hopes of maybe going to the World Cup, then, like I say, he could be an interesting selection. On if you're involved in those sort of fantasy games. The midfield, you are right. And how that maybe his midfield will look in game one to maybe compared to game 3 or game 4, I think it will change. There are opportunities for players in and around there, and I think maybe Ruben Amorim will cut his cloth accordingly with regards to who he plays in there, and maybe you will see Bruno dropping a little bit deeper on occasions. You may have Mason Mount coming in. Does he go with the Casemiros at holding? You've got Ugarte. It's, like I say, it is a little bit of a minefield, and I think that we could see this United lineup, change from game week to game week, like I say, as he looks to maybe just sort of move his personnel around based on availability of his players.
Now let's talk about availability, because that obviously affected the team a huge amount last season. At the moment, on the Premier Injuries website, Martinez, Mashraoui, Anana, and Xerxes are the players out. But kind of talking about that, you've mentioned Agate there, and others in and around the squad. Who do you think returning could have the biggest impact? Who's going to be kind of nursed back in? Are injuries going to play a big role in Manchester United once again this season?
There have been changes within the backroom staff, so whether that, I'm always keen to stress, and I'm a big advocate, there's not this, it's multifaceted why players may pick up injuries, and you just can't pinpoint it to one single thing. So they're trying to do the best away from the field to manage that situation. I think in terms of the number of injuries, they were certainly within the top 3 or 4 overall within the league, and that's been the general sort of way Manchester United have been going over the last few years. And there's been some stalwarts of that treatment room. I touched upon it before. I think this is a huge season for Luke Shaw. If it doesn't happen for him, I think you just need to accept that, you've got a player now who's a 1 and 2, a 1 and 3 player. He cannot play week in and week out at the highest level. And it could be that, Manchester United will be looking to maybe cash in or certainly move him on. Joshua Xerxes is a player who, again, arrived with a little bit of fanfare, struggled with a hamstring problem. It's come off the back again of another little niggling hamstring issue. And even the small ones at this point in the season, the pre-season program, you're missing a lot of time on the pitch. So again, he's already playing catch up. So that's a difficult one for him. But really, you would like to see him and the young lad come on and do well. He's looked all right in glimpses. Elsewhere, Lenny Yoros had his fair share of problems in the past as well. So again, it's about, Ruben Amorim being able to sort of manage his squad. Luca Martinez returning from this ACL problem slightly ahead of schedule. I'm led to believe, the expectation was we could have maybe looking at the back end of this year, but now, there's even some suggesting that we could be looking at maybe September going into early October. So, he could be a big player. The Argentine is highly regarded, but when you've got the likes of De Ligt, you've got Maguire, who we haven't talked about, you've got Martinez, there's a lot of competition, and they could cause a few surprises. I don't expect them to be pushing for honours, but certainly an improvement on last season, and the top half finishing a half decent cup run isn't out the realms.
And finally, Benjamin Sesko. What is the kind of news there? Is he going to be managed conservatively in those first few games? Because at the moment, a lot of people are predicting that, as we've got up here on the screen, Cunha to start with Mbeumo and Fernandes behind it. Or do you think that Manchester United are going to take this opportunity in front of Old Trafford, show off their star striker, and hopefully he gets, some sort of involvement against Arsenal as well?
Yeah, I mean, his profile for the Premier League is spot on. He's big, powerful, a physical presence. He's got all the attributes that you'd like maybe from a centre forward to succeed at the Premier League. again, it just comes down to, has he had enough time with these new teammates to be able to sort of settle in? Is Ruben Amorim happy with what he's seeing? If the manager's to be believed, then it's been very positive up until this point. Again, when you're talking about the likes of Bruno Fernandes, Matheus Cunha, Brian Mbuemo, and Benjamin Sesko, you've got 4 players there, and inherently, we're talking about a 3-4-3. If it's to be believed, we're Aaron, this will be his first time he's had the opportunity to really sort of deploy his setups and tactics the way he's want with these players. So, going forward, that probably suggests that maybe Bruno could be playing a little bit deeper unless Brian and Mbuemo does, and Fernandes goes out a little bit wide. Whether Sesko starts this weekend, I'm not so sure. I think, again, he might just err on the side of caution and introduce him from the bench.
Okay. So on to Newcastle, and this one's obviously, there's a lot of negativity around Newcastle here, and obviously they've not brought in who they wanted and things like that. But the long and the short of it is they have brought in, that they've brought in, I've forgotten his name, Anthony Elanga from Nottingham Forest, and then obviously Malik Fior as well. So they're 2 solid signings there. They're boosting a team that was already really complete. Obviously, Isaac might be out of the door. There's a lot of problems there, but there's still, more than a competent firepower there with Gordon probably leading the line. So can you talk us through the injury news there, and also kind of, your beliefs around the squad? Because obviously, I'm sure people can guess you're a Geordie through and through. You're a fan of the Toon Army. So yeah, talk us through the squad there.
Yeah, I mean, the only sort of major injury concern that we're currently carrying is Joe Willock. That was an Achilles problem picked up on the club's pre-season tour. Didn't look great when it first happened, but thankfully nothing too serious. Potentially a return before the international break. But, the way things are looking at Newcastle, does he force his way into that starting 11 at this moment in time? Probably not, in my opinion. Obviously, with regards to Alexander Isak, he's out of contention. For well-documented reasons. Elsewhere within the team, now, for me, there's a bit of a it's difficult to sort of pin down. Lewis Hall only recently returned from that foot problem that kept him out of the Carabao Cup. So he's had a few months on the sideline. So quite rightly, I don't see him in that starting 11. Again, maybe as we sort of progress towards the back end of August going into September, he's a player that when he's approaching full fitness, he will look to start. And that maybe then jeopardizes the position of Kieran Trippier. In my opinion, Lewis Hall comes in and then Tino Livramento switches flanks. It's centre back. We've got sort of 3 big players with regard, with Dan Burn, who I thought was absolutely outstanding last season. Of course, another big year for him, and he'll be hoping that his performances and leadership quality it will be enough to sort of book him on the plane to the World Cup. We have Fabian Schär, and then we've also got Sven Botman. Again, could be another big player for Newcastle. Had his well-documented injury problem, ACL, bit of niggling groin injuries coming back. So maybe that groin problem that he did suffer in pre-season, played 45 minutes last weekend, and maybe just enough to convince Eddie Howe that Shaw and Byrne are the 2 preferred starters this weekend.
Just talking on Harvey Barnes as well. He's somebody that's had, especially last season, a career that was affected by injuries. How's he looking now this season? Is he looking sharp and on point?
Yeah, he's done all right in pre-season. Again, when we're looking at those attacking positions, it's difficult. You've got Harvey Barnes, you've got Jacob Murphy, you've got Elanga, and the assumption will be without a real sort of recognised striker with any quality, and that's all due respect to Osula, you would think that Anthony Gordon is the player that's going to lead that front line. So for me, I think Harvey Barnes will probably get the nod, and then the other position up, will be between Murphy and Elanga.
So on to Nottingham Forest, and they had an outstanding season last season. But I guess one of the talking points, as well as the injury news here, is maybe more on what we're thinking about their longevity this season, because Europa League stacked with the Premier League, they're not the deepest squad. And obviously, I think, it's quite obvious to a lot of people. They played out of their skin last season. They can't keep this up. Is that maybe one of the concerns that you have, especially in the second half of the season? There'll be a drop off once they're safe. There'll be one of those teams on the beach. I think like fans will be having higher expectations that they'll be pushing for Europe again. But do you think realistically this will be a team that will be happy, 10th mid-table, that kind of sort of situation?
I mean, my initial concerns are when I hear Nuno in front of the cameras talking about having major concerns heading into the season. One, that he has very, very big issues with his team preparation. He has big issues with his squad. He has players training that know that they're going to be going out on loan. They've had several departures and they haven't been able to get the players in and over the line before game week 1, which has been a big concern. Now, I know they've tabled at least 3 or 4 bids on Friday in the hope that maybe that'll be addressed over the coming game weeks. But heading into game week 1, there are certainly a lot of red flags around that Forest lineup. So and the mood in the camp is very somber. I've never quite heard, let alone Nuno, a manager talk the way he do ahead of the new season. He sounded very sort of downbeat. But if they were to bring in those 3 or 4 players as they hoped, then I don't think Forest will be looking to accept that drop off and really in and around that mid table. I think they were a team who at one stage were hoping to maybe push for Champions League football or certainly European football, and I think that's got to be their aim and their goal again this season. Like I say, if they get everybody over the line, they've splashed out a big chunk of change. They managed to retain the services of Morgan Gibbs-White. We know the likes of Murillo and Milankovic at the back, 2 quality centre backs. So they have got some decent players in there if they can just bolster up that squad and just sprinkle a little bit of magic in there, and that might be enough to just do enough just to get them on the fringes of that European qualification spot.
Now I'm about to say a swear word, Ben. Sunderland up next. They're back in the Premier League after goodness knows how long. What can be the kind of injury news there? Is there fitness concerns, or should they be looking forward to a positive start to the season because they're hosting West Ham? And I think that's a good opportunity for them to maybe, show what they're made of in the Premier League.
Yeah, lots going on at the Stadium of Light. They've invested a lot of money. They seem to have recruited quite well. A few of those players have come in, are not quite up to it in terms of their fitness. I'm thinking about the likes of maybe former West Ham fullback Arthur Masuaku. They've also got Omar Alderete Fernandez. Again, don't know a great deal about him, but these are players who've come in and, they're lacking a little bit of match fitness. They can come in and maybe take a place on the bench. But certainly, again, pushing for a start, that seems highly unlikely. They have been a little bit unfortunate. I think Roman Mundil had hamstring surgery after a decent beginning to his preseason. That's going to keep him out. You would think around about 3 months typically, so that's going to rule him out the first part or so. And then we've still got a couple of carryovers from last season. With Luke O'Neill, who dislocated his shoulder in the playoff final, I think in the first minute. His availability is questionable. But, with a lot of players and this step up, they're gonna have to really sort of come in and hit the ground running. One of your former, old boys, Granit Xhaka, it was confirmed that he's captain. So, there's going to be no slacking off with regards to that. And, if anybody's going to be able to fire the boys up and make sure they're on task, then Xhaka's going to be, the man.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see him back in the Premier League. I was sad that he kind of left. I felt that there was something that he could have, given more to the club. But at the end of the day, the decisions were made for whatever reason. And so it would just be nice, to see him back, and hopefully he has a warm welcome when he comes back to the Emirates. But Spurs are up next. They'll be quite positive about their performance against PSG. They didn't lose to them in 90 minutes. I think there's a lot of question marks about who's going to be playing, though, with injuries, with talks, and even the kind of discussion points from the manager. Thomas Frank, he's kind of maybe indicated that Richarlison is going to be starting over Dominic Solanke. What are your main talking points when looking at Spurs?
Yeah, I mean, Thomas Frank was very complimentary of Richarlison after his performance midweek, spoke about his intensity, his desire, his quality, and yeah, he was full of praise. So, it sounds as if Frank is a big fan of Richarlison. So, that would probably lead you to believe that he's going to get the nod, particularly as Dominic Solanke is coming off the back of that minor ankle injury. Elsewhere within the squad, the other main talking point will be around East Basuma. Now, for disciplinary reasons, he turned up. There was a couple of sessions that he turned up late for. He wasn't part of the Super Cup squad. That's all forgotten about. It's being dealt with now. It's whether he comes straight back into that team. I don't think it sends out a great message if he serves that ban and then all of a sudden he's thrown back into the 11. I think it could be that Thomas Frank more or less goes with the same 11 as he did with PSG. The fact that they're playing games in quick succession didn't seem overly bothered about that. He did say that the squad had recovered really well.
And looking at it as well, Destiny Udogie, who was a player that was really, really good in parts last season, and the season before he was absolutely stand out. And Mickey van der Ven. These are both players that are going to be kind of returning this year, if you will. What is their kind of fitness coming into this season? What is the rumors or the not the rumors? Sorry, we only stick with facts and information here. What is the latest on those two?
Yeah, Destiny and Dougal pulled up with a little bit of a knee issue while warming up ahead of one of Tottenham's pre-season games. More of a precaution. It's turned out a little bit more serious than first thought. But the good news is he is on the road to recovery, and potentially maybe within the next 7 to 10 days, and he should be pushing for a spot back in that Tottenham lineup. With Van de Ven, again, we've seen in the Super Cup, he looked pretty sharp. He grabbed himself a goal. So, coming off the back of those hamstring issues, we hope with a solid preseason under his belt, he's a player that can really sort of kick on and have, major influence on this Tottenham team under Thomas Frank.
And so we know that James Maddison is most likely out for the rest of the season or most of the season. But what's the latest with Dejan Kulusevski? Because he was going to be their answer to that creative midfielder. He's gone as well. But how long is he going to be out for?
Yeah, I think realistically, certainly in terms of maybe pushing for a start or how I wouldn't expect a return before the international break. So we're maybe looking mid to late September. None of these return dates are set in stone. It's a difficult one.
Yeah.
And Postecoglou said it was going to be around Gameweek 1. Thomas Frank early in his tenure said, look, he's not going to be around for that opener. He has been out. He's still working individually. So if you look at the fact that there will be a period where he does rejoin the group. Once he rejoins the group, he's got to do a pre-season program. So it's how he decides to build up that fitness and integrate himself back in the squad. But, realistically, you may be looking at the back end of September, maybe going into October before Kulusevski is really sort of anywhere near to where he should be in terms of that fitness.
So moving on to West Ham, what is the latest news from there? What has Graham Potter told us?
Yeah, generally the Hammer squad is looking pretty fit and healthy. Joe Jerthy, the youngster, was a player who unfortunately suffered a bit of a setback in training. That was ankle ligament injury, still a few weeks away. Chris Somerville is the one that we had hoped to see back for the opening rounds. But again, that's taken a little bit longer. There have been one or two setbacks along the way, which is why I say the club are taking things very slowly with the wing, and they do want to push it and again risk another setback. But he could maybe return before the international break.
And what are your feelings on the prospects of West Ham as well? They didn't look great under Graham Potter last season, but was it teething problems? Did he need time to set his tactics? Because now they've splashed a little bit of cash over the summer. And also, I think one of the big returns is Fulkrug up front as well to the team. Um, do you expect more from the Hammers this season?
I think you can also throw in Paquetá as well there. We talked about a player who was touted to go to Manchester City before, charges or potential charges were talked about for match fixing and match betting. All of that's been concluded. He's been found not guilty. So, you know, uh, Paquetá has the quality and the capabilities to really carry that West Ham United team. And I was always a big fan of Graham Potter. Difficult when you're coming into a team and it's you haven't had the opportunity to do all the proper work on the training pitches when you're in the cut and thrust of Premier League football. Now that he's had that full summer, I think maybe recruitment wise, he probably would have liked maybe one or two others through the door. Callum Wilson, of course, former Newcastle striker, arrived there and taking the place of his podcast buddy Mikel Antonio, who was released. I certainly expect West Ham to do okay. I think they'll be pushing for just a place, maybe pushing towards that sort of 10th to 12th spot.
And finally, we move on to Wolverhampton Wanderers. They have a very tough start to the season, but are injuries going to hold them back, or do they have a clean bill of health?
Yeah, more or less a clean bill of health, Leon. Chirwani is a player who has been sidelined since the beginning of the year, but whether you really sort of classify him as an out-and-out sort of first-team squad player is negotiable. He has been in and around that team, but most of his minutes were spent either with the under-21s in the youth side. So he shouldn't be too far from a return. But Wolves would have welcomed the likes of Yersin Mosquera back from an ACL problem. That kept him out for the majority of last season. It's almost, I think, about 11 months. He's had a couple of appearances behind closed doors, returned to the bench about 2 weeks ago. Not ready to start, but again, fantastic news that he's in and around that first team once again.
So that is all the latest injury news for game week 1 of the Premier League. We're so excited that it's back. And just to remind you, we will be doing this every week at 6 p.m. on Fridays. So we look forward to seeing you back next week. But for now, we're just going to wish you the best of luck. Do subscribe to the channel. Do like the video. Leave us comments after as well. And hopefully we'll answer them next week. But for now, it's a goodbye from both of us. And end stream.